I had skipped hundreds of frontier tales. If the opening did not cut skin, I turned it off at once. Tonight was different. A loner lowered his gun to hand, a kerosene lamp to a strange girl. By morning, the ground before the porch would rise in a dark shade. Stay and watch whose silence this will change, and perhaps your own. On the wooden table lay a thin streak of light, like mist caught on the lamp glass. The soot clung thick, darker in some places, lighter in others, forming a ring exactly where a hand had once touched. The brass beneath was tarnished, showing green blotches as if the metal had drunk enough seasons of rain and snow. The wick was half burnt, one end curled like a dry root scorched. The smell of old oil was faint and flat, not harsh, resting like the scent of a drawer left unopened too long. I had seen that lamp many times, on days no one needed fire, and perhaps if that night had held no other sound, it would have stayed as it was, doing its single task, suggesting light without giving light. Elias pushed the chair from the table no more than half an inch. He sat like a compact shadow, shoulders heavy, chin pressed into the collar of his wool shirt. His right hand tapped lightly on the hammer laid across his knees, steady rhythm, unhurried. The sound suggested seeds falling on a dry barn floor, scattered yet audible. The coal stove grumbled low, forcing heat through the cracks of wedged stones. Outside, the sky gave no sound except the wooden door creaking as it shrank. I remembered the doorframe of his house always carried a fine crack. Running from the latch down to the bottom edge. In cold, it spoke. In heat, it stayed quiet, like an animal with two moods. There were evenings when he tapped the hammer only to measure how thick the silence was. Sometimes 3 taps, sometimes 7. Tonight, 4. Each stroke rose, then died flat on the wood. No echo. That told enough about the snow. Flakes fell soft, heavy, sucking sound the way a thick cloth pressed on a mouth. The kerosene lamp turned its glass toward the window like a dim eye. Elias did not look at it straight, yet whenever his hand paused, his wrist stiffened a beat. His glance cut across that object before returning to the fire. I guessed he counted the things he did not do, did not pour more oil, did not change the wick, did not clean the glass. In this land, people kept the habit of checking what must be used before the dark came in full. But sometimes, people also left a thing at the border of use. Not use, as a small trial for fate. In the corner, the big hammer leaned against the wall, its head dark and polished like a kidney. Beside it stood an empty bucket, rim still marked with water from the morning. On the shelf, a tin mug stood upside down, and beside it another cup, overturned in the same way. Roof answered like the back of a grown man drawing a breath. Ash in the stove shivered, shooting a few sparks. Elias rotated the hammer on his thighs, the wooden handle sliding a short way before stopping exactly where his hand knew. He did not cough. He did not breathe hard, only kept his throat tight at a narrow notch, as though afraid any sound released would become a binding. Men who lived long in such places learned to speak with hands, with objects laid on a table, with the way a door opened fast or slow. For a long while nothing new came. The small knife lay on canvas, blade pointing outward like a stubborn line. On the wall the coat rope shrank in the cold, bunching the garments so they crackled like dry leaves. The window fogged with damp. Its glass threw back the lamp as an oval blot warped and smaller than the real. I did not know what Elias saw there. Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. On the table, near the lamp's base, was a pale ring lighter than the wood around it. The mark of something once placed there. Maybe the second cup, maybe a wooden box. The stain was old enough to blend into the color, yet still clear enough for one who knew the house to see it was not the table's true grain. I always believed that circle kept something unnamed, the same way the lamp glass kept a thin layer of smoke. Out on the porch, snow piled on the 3rd step of the wooden stairs into a smooth curve. That curve often broke if a foot pressed. It had not broken. That made the house sound like it held its breath. In such silence, the smallest noises rose to the surface. The sound of a hand setting down cloth, the wood swelling with a faint creak, metal contracting and touching somewhere under the roof, thread by thread. Elias set the hammer aside. His fingers went along the edge of the table, stopping at a scratch that ran slantwise. The groove was shallow, sharp-edged, not the mark of a kitchen knife. Perhaps a nail. He pressed his fingertip there, then lifted it away. Every motion measured. He was the kind of man who knew his strength counted like the number of logs he could split in an hour, never wasted on gestures. The stove sank lower. He fed in a dry stick of the right size, not too big, not too small, leaning it at an angle so the draft was not choked. Smoke climbed the flue so little it did not sting the eyes. The scent of resin brushed through and was gone. Between that pine and the old lamp oil, the room took on a smell of something neutral, belonging to no one. That was my thought. Perhaps he thought only it was the smell of a night much like other nights. Then the sound came. Not wind, not wood. 3 knocks. Thud, thud, thud. Equal pauses between, like someone outside counting to an old lesson, not quick, not eager. A person who knew he might not be let in, yet also knew he did not need to knock again. Like writing one's name short, then waiting to be called. Elias raised his head. He never startled. Perhaps his body had learned to stay still. Only his eyes changed. I had seen those eyes once before at the market, when a young horse snapped its rope. His eyes then tracked the animal's run, measured the rope's length, the step of the porch, not the crowd around. This time those eyes went from the door to the lamp, then stopped on the wick. A moment so brief that without knowing, one might think it never happened. He did not rise at once. You could hear that in the chair not scraping. People think pausing a beat or two means doubt. Not always. In these empty lands, waiting a beat or two is a way of listening. To hear if after the 3 knocks came a 4th. To hear if the wind replied. To feel if the floor underfoot shifted from a new weight. He listened. I listened too. There was no 4th knock. Thud, thud, thud. Again. The spacing still exact, the table unchanged, the lamp still facing the window. The wick blackened a little more as the cold rose on the surface. Elias reached out his hand, not toward the door. His hand went to the lamp's base. His thumb slid along the tiny well joining base to body. The spot was slightly sharp. He pulled back, set his hand on the table, as if to confirm that if light was needed tonight, that light would exist because of him. No one in these parts knocked like that except those taught by the old. The old often taught that, when entering another's house, knock 3 times, evenly, without push, so the host would know he was not cornered. Young drifters had no such style. They knocked fast or pounded. The sound of 3 steady knocks always made me both safe and uneasy at once. It was polite, but it meant the one outside knew the law here. Elias pushed the chair from its place another inch. The leg scraped the floor, a sound drawn out in an empty note. He leaned forward, right shoulder half an inch ahead. His left hand touched the hammer's spine, as if to check that a friend was still there. He did not grip, only touched. He walked toward the door, each step measuring a plank. No plank gave sound. He had replaced the loose nails since the end of last season, I remembered. The door had 2 bars, one in the middle, one below. The middle was wood, the lower was iron set at a slant. The iron often squeaked. That night it did not. His hand slid in, touched the wooden bar, paused half a beat. Firelight from the stove struck the brass lamp, threw back a small streak onto his wrist. The streak was not hot, only exposed the veins running green beneath the skin. The hand's skin was cracked in the way of one who handled wood, washed in cold water, never used grease. The cracks were small but deep, like puddles in gravel roads where wagons passed. Outside, the wind shifted. I guessed the snow was turning heavier because the roof changed its voice, from breathing to faint groaning. The cloth hanging behind the door stirred. It knew what had to stay fixed for the house to remain a house. The lamp was still unlit. The glass caught another faint warmth, not from its own flame, but from the stove. On the glass showed a blurred double image, the door's shadow and the man's. That blur wavered a little when the wind pressed. Then it froze. I will not forget that feeling, like 2 sentences wanting to overlap but not in time. The knocking did not return at once. Silence slid into the gap between human rhythm and the house's rhythm. This silence was not nothing. It was full of small noises: snow brushing the steps, the rope of coats trembling, coal sighing out a long breath before burning on. In that fullness, he decided not to open, not to speak, only placed his fingers on the bar's edge, the very spot his hand was trained to find. No force yet. I thought he looked to the lamp, not to seek light, but to ask a question without words. Tonight, are you needed? The lamp did not answer. Metal does not speak, but its silence allowed its master to see everything else. The doorframe, the bar, the knocks already past, the stove's heat, the oil's unmoving smell, the draft, the hammer, the overturned cups, the pale ring on the table, all gathered into one word: enough. 3 knocks. The third time, thud, 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 exactly like the first. Not higher, not lower. The one outside, perhaps, was so cold every muscle turned even, or had lived with waiting. In this land, waiting meant a man did not wish to demand. It was not the same as patience. It was close to knowing his place. Elias tilted his head half an inch, like a man listening to another layer. I almost saw his neck tense. Only that. Then he let the wooden bar go. Not to open, but to test how smooth it slid. His fingers made a motion unfinished. The door stayed shut. The stove still burned. The lamp still dead. The wick still bent black. I swear, the whole room waited one more half-beat. Outside, the cold season had not finished its word. Inside, there was one man, one lamp, one table, a pair of overturned cups, a hammer. Not much. Enough. And that night, before he stood fully, before his hand touched the iron bar, before that silence changed into another kind, the fire struck the brass once more, leaving on the lamp glass a thin streak of light. That streak I remember always. The light of a thing extinguished, but still recording presence. In this land, many lives chose that way. Elias was still not fully risen. Silence stood right between two who had not yet met. The door burst inward like a cold hand pressed to the house's nape. Thinner. She raised her left hand, not straight, not shaking, only put one finger on the rim of the bowl, at the driest spot. The fingertip pressed lightly, withdrew. The skin left on the metal a thin shine, like a short letter. Not eating. Reversal arrives in silence of that kind. In this land, the hungry eat at once, the not hungry refuse at once. She did what was in between, test and withdraw. As if to test whether this fire was real, as if to test whether this warmth was meant for her. Her breath shifted, longer by half a beat, but not deeper. Elias moved weight from left foot to right, only that. Then he went to the corner of the house. That corner held a low wooden chest, on top a coil of hemp rope and some short planks. He slipped his hand under, drew out an old wool blanket. The wool was ash-gray, coarse fiber, its edges worn to small fringes, one corner patched with thread of another color. New droplet. The second step did not come. She stopped, tilted her head as if listening. I listened too. Outside the wind shifted again. Far off something small slid from the roof. In the woods perhaps a branch broke. No human voice, no horse. She raised her eyes to Elias, not to ask leave, It was the look of one measuring whether the distance between two people was enough for one movement without touching. He answered by pulling his sleeve half an inch, showing his wrist's green vein, as if saying, "Nothing hidden here." His fingers hooked the chair's edge, then let go, all slow enough for the other to see the line. She moved half a step more, close enough to reach the bowl without leaving the door. Her finger touched the bowl's rim again, this time longer. The skin felt the heat. The blood at her wrist spread a little, but she did not take. She dropped her hand, shifted back half an inch, like one resolved to keep the habit of caution, even before food. That act was a speech without words. "I still hold the right to go." The wool blanket still lay on the chair. The folds rose in small ridges like terrain. A stray fiber caught at the corner, flickering in the firelight. Elias looked at that fold one beat longer, then he went to the stove, turned the iron bar, opened another slit for air, so the fire breathed stronger. He did not look at her while doing it, but he did not turn his back either. His body leaned, leaving space between himself and the stove, as if to keep the way unblocked. She edged toward the chair, not to sit. She set the hide she had worn onto the chair back, held it there with two fingers, like one testing the surface's cleanness. The cold sweat on her neck had dried to a thin film, reflecting a faint streak from the stove. Her breathing evened, no longer quick. The cold in her eyes receded, leaving a calmer gaze. Yet her feet stayed crossed, toes pointed toward the door. Elias took from the shelf an overturned cup, flipped it, turned its mouth toward the flame so heat licked through, then set it down a hand's span from the bowl. He poured hot water from a small kettle, the stream unbroken, no splash. The sound of water clear, because the house had gone still again. He pushed the cup toward the space between bowl and chair. The cup stopped at the pale ring's edge. As if it had just fitted a sign, there was no sit, no eat. In this house, objects did the work. The bowl turned its spoon toward her. The cup sat on the old ring as if waiting for another hand. The wool claimed the chair, but not the choice. The door exactly where it had been, not shifted a hair. The steam mark on its rim faded and vanished. Elias nodded very slightly. A motion only one long alone would read, accepting another's pace. He stepped back, turned the chair a narrow angle so it no longer faced the door but leaned toward the stove. Leaned like a bridge. He returned to the table, set his hand on the lamp's brass body, felt the cold of metal, then lifted away. The lamp still dark, the wick still black, but the warmth of his hand left a faint trace on the glass. She lifted the hide from the chair back, folded it in two, set it on the armrest. Her eyes still did not blink much. Her chin lowered a fraction, the pose of one ready. Her right hand at last touched the spoon's handle, the handle cold. Skin against metal give a tiny sound, like metal breathing. But she did not scoop. She turned the spoon once, testing weight, put it back. Then her finger touched the bowl's rim a third time. This time, after a beat, she withdrew, rubbed the fingertip on the chair edge to dry. Few would notice the gesture. I had seen it in a winter campaign long ago. Men tested if their hands were warm enough to hold heat without burning, yet still kept fingertips sharp enough for bowstring. She carried old habits into another's house. The tension did not vanish. It only changed shape. Elias looked toward the door, not out of suspicion, out of listening. He shifted the iron bar half an inch, tested its hold. No creak. He let the bar back. His fingers slid across the wood, stopped at the hollow worn by years. Then he returned to his place, standing outside the line between chair and table, not blocking, not too near. A man who knew how to keep distance. The water dripping from her coat had thinned. The floorboards, where drops had fallen, began to dry at the edges, leaving pale lines like the map of a small river just withdrawn. She glanced down, then at the bowl. The steam now only a faint ribbon, like smoke from a candle about to die. She reached for the spoon, took very little, raised it, did not touch her lips. She held the smell near her face, let the heat cover her eyes, her nose bridge, let the last bead of cold sweat at her temple dissolve. Then she lowered the spoon, set it back in the bowl, scooped again. This time, more. When the spoon touched her lips, the house made no sound. Even the stove quieted, as if listening. She swallowed cloth. The steam dissolved. The watermarks on the floor closed and vanished. The wind outside changed voice to a steadier tune. On the lamp's glass the faint warmth from before had cooled, but left a trace. The wick still bent black, the lamp still dark, the chair still empty, the door still within hand's reach. And she stood, holding the right to leave at any moment. In this land, sometimes that alone was enough to change a night. No one spoke. No one needed to. Only the objects took turns to stand, guiding two people yet unnamed. The chair angled, the bowl turned its spoon, the cup sat at the old pale ring. The blanket folded to its crease, the lamp dark, the stove warm, the door shut. Half a trust held still on the threshold, neither forward nor back. I call this climb, though it climbed without sound. It climbed by one keeping the door in reach, the other keeping the stove in sight, and between them, objects quietly changing roles. In this land, tension rarely shouted. It only thickened like air before snow changed flake. And that evening, no one won. Only the cold eased. Only warmth moved slow, like a latecomer who did not apologize. The wind slammed the wall like an untiring beast. The roof groaned, timbers shrinking with a sound like teeth grinding. The stove's fire bowed, then flared, its light sweeping across the table, across the brass lamp, leaving a thin streak on smoke-stained glass. She still stood by the door. Her boots left two narrow, wet marks, the length of a hand, now spreading like ink in cold water. Elias lifted the gun. The stock pressed into his right shoulder where the wool shirt darkened with old sweat. His trigger finger lay straight along the guard, not inside. His eyes never left her, not the stove, not the table, not the window. Only her. Their shadows fell on the wall, meeting where the fire struck strongest, then separating when it weakened. More than once the two shadows merged into one long, warped shape, like a tree trunk struck by lightning still steaming. The rifle was lever action. The lever hung like a hook not fully drawn. His eyes knew well that half a beat would send a bullet to where it must. But the half beat never came. The room leaned toward silence. Outside, so heavy. That night, it weighed like a decision. Elias shifted a foot. Not much. Enough to move weight away from firing. His right shoulder sank half an inch. His breath changed one beat. The trigger stayed bare. He lowered the gun. The lever closed with a soft sound like a fingernail tapping bone. He let the stock touch the table's edge, leaned the rifle there, then slid it down, laid across both knees. No thud. He was used to keeping sound under skin. His eyes still did not leave her. His left hand opened, showing cracks like dry streams in a desert. The hand of one who split wood, a hand that knew how to put down and lift without noise. He did not say, "It's fine." He did not say, "Go" or "Stay." He set the gun aside, out of reach of one standing at the door. Then his right hand went to the center of the room, to the lamp. Men of this land had gestures without thought. But that night, each gesture seemed written into the wood grain. His hand touched the brass body. The metal cold, but not as cold as skin from the storm. His thumb slid along the tiny weld where base joined stem. It was a ridge. He let his fingertip burn lightly. Then he lifted the lamp. The lamp made no sound. The oil inside was old. Its scent, faint, but enough for one raised with lamps to know at once. He turned the small knob to test its smoothness. The wick rose a notch, showing more black. Fire from the stove struck the glass, bounced back a faint glow on his hand, on the cracked, darkened back of his hand. The veins showed sharp under that reflection. The light wavered, not from the wick burning, but from the stove's flare pushing shadow back and forth. I still recall that feeling. The light of a thing not yet burning on its own, borrowing flame to say it could. He turned the lamp toward her, the other hand holding its body at a height safe from burns, should anyone touch by accident. He stepped once. The scrape of his boot sole on the wood floor, like a stroke of a dry brush. She did not retreat. Her eyes left the line of the lowered gun, moved to the line of the lamp coming near. Her shoulders sank a fraction. I guessed so, because the shadow on the wall lost a small, trembling line. The smell of wet clothes eased. The faint smell of oil slid in, standing between stove and door, like a mediator of few words. The distance shortened. He stopped, within arm rested in her hands. He withdrew, not touching the cloth behind the door, not touching the blanket. His hand passed through the air, leaving behind a thin, warm trace I almost saw. He stepped back half a pace, not far, just enough. She lowered her eyes to the lamp. The black wick looked sideways through the dim glass like a closed eye. The oil inside shifted once, leaving a wet line on the wall. She turned the knob up and down to test. the sound faint, like a snapped key. She did not strike fire, did not bring it near the stove. She turned the lamp so the reflected flame would not strike her eyes. The lamp circled with her hand, the light jumping from hand to hand, then settled. The chair remained. She turned, stepped without haste. Her boots left the old wet mark, made two new faint ones, narrow, drying fast. She reached the chair, the gray wool blanket folded on its back. She did not pull it down. She sat, lamp in her lap, arms around it like one holding a sleeping animal. The lamp lay on her knees, its base against the cloth of her trousers, marking a darker circle on the old wool. She did not light it. The wick stayed black. The cold in the room changed its nature. No longer biting, it thickened, then stood still, like mist resting on unmoving water. Only the crackle of wood remained. A log split, a spark rose and died in the air. Coals shifted a fraction, closing a gap, murmuring like a late reply. At that moment, all things that could strike had stopped striking. The wind outside still drove, but the wall swallowed its sound. The door no longer shook. The hanging cloth stood still. The hot water cup on the table cooled another notch, its surface flat as glass. Elias did not lean on the wall. He stood a distance from the chair, enough to hear her breath, without needing to look at the cup's rim. The gun lay on the table, stock outward, barrel inward. The trigger empty. His hand hung at his side. The thumb tapped his thigh once, then stopped. His eyes passed over the lamp, did not stop at the wick, did not stop at the glass, stopped where her hands held. There, cold brass, was steadied by skin, not to slip, not to fall. There, the fire borrowed the lamp to throw a faint ring, enough for one standing apart to know the lamp was present in the room. A late drop of water fell from her coat hem to the floor, stepped left once, left space between himself and the door, not blocking the way. A man may say, "I trust," in 1,000 words. In this land, he says it by leaving the path clear. He inclined his head toward the stove, opened the air slit a notch. The flame did not flare. It only added a long sigh. The light on the lamp glass trembled once, then steadied. My throat was dry, not from heat, from silence stacked in layers, thick enough to be lifted by hand. In that layering, a story dropped without sound, a choice, a collapse, but no one saw it fall. They only saw the gun no longer in his hand, the lamp in another's, and the fire still only fire, promising nothing, threatening nothing. It did its part, letting people see each other at measured distance. She held the lamp a long while, then she eased her arms half an inch so it no longer pressed her chest, but stayed in her lap. She did not bring it closer to the stove, did not raise it to the flame. The black wick kept its silent curve. In that pause, I heard one thin fiber of the wool blanket slip from its fringe, fall to the floor like a stray drop of rain. No one picked it up. No one heard but me. At last Elias sat on the table's edge, not facing her, but angled toward the stove. His elbows on his knees, hands interlaced, his eyes on the space between. In that space, the lamp unlit, the gun uncocked, the blanket unfolded, the bowl untouched again, and the night stood unmoving. The choking moment present, like an uninvited guest, sitting quiet, touching no one, yet making all change posture. In this land, that moment often came when no one spoke. The wind still struck the wall, but now it sounded like the coat of a large man brushing past the door without entering. It came, it went, nothing left to prove. The lamp in her lap, unlit, and because it stayed dark, everything else was seen clear. The cracks on his hand, the soot on the glass, the withdrawn mark on the floor, the strand fallen from the blanket, and a path clear from chair to door. All held still together, like a darkened photograph. I kept that image long in mind, for in it no one spoke morality, only a man lowering a gun, a woman holding an unlit lamp, and the sound of wood popping to testify that fire, too, knows how to be silent when it must. That night, he did not feed the stove large logs. He kept the fire breathing even, like a tamed beast. The glow crawled the planks, tripped at the chair's leg, climbed the table's edge, then stopped at the lamp's glass. Elias spread his coat to lie by the door, its shoulder touching the old crack line running from latch to floor. His coat thick, but the wood there colder than earth. He lay lamp oil and wet hide drying on the chairback. Near morning the breathing changed, a little deeper, as of one freed from shiver. The wind outside still struck, but not fierce. The wooden wall no longer groaned, only gave a single tack at times. The hanging cloth behind the door no longer clung to her back. It fell to its place, straight, still. On the table the bean bowl half gone. The spoon lay quiet, still turned the way it had been since evening. The cup stayed on the faint pale ring. Flame at the wick's edge flared a thin orange streak, then died. The lamp still unlit. Elias shifted very little. One leg bent, the other stretched, palm flat on the wood, as if ready to push up if needed. His back did not lean. He did not sleep. At times his thumb tapped the latch hook once. Steady, like the night he tapped the hammer handle. I guessed he counted not hours. He counted breaths, each breath a hook, fitting into the next, forming a chain. No one said stay, no one said go, yet each breath passed through a small door. At times the fire sank until only red coals glowed. The room dropped deeper into a darker tier. In that tier I heard the lamp's body expand faintly, then contract again. Metal knew cold in its own way. Its sound smaller than a mosquito's flight, yet one heard it if ears stayed awake. Elias heard. His breath shortened one beat, then returned. When the first gray streak slid through the window crack, the coals flickered once. No wind now, only the cold of things done fighting. Elias pushed up. His knee bone gave a small fuck with the floor. He pulled his coat onto his shoulders, left it in its old place. His hand touched the latch, did not open. He turned his back to the room. The chair was empty, the lamp on the table, not where it had been last night. Pulled closer to the seat's place. Its glass bore a faint hand mark, not a hard press, a light sweep, half round, leaving the wick exposed, as of someone turning and then stopping. On the table edge, a slow drip from a drying coat left a thin circle, then vanished, the wool blanket still folded, the hide no longer on the chairback. Elias did not call. He stood by the chair long enough to hear if the room still held sound of one just gone. The room held the scent of sweat dried from cold, the silver of sleeping breath, the forest stamped into cloth. Such scents never stay long. He began the work of morning, stirring coals, feeding wood, setting the kettle. The kettle's water did not boil quick. It shivered faintly at the spout. He took the cloth from it, stopped, looked through it. On the other side, the room looked back, softened 1 degree. He accepted. He wiped the brass body, scraped dust from its welded seams, then set the lamp in its place. His finger turned the wick down half around. The wick bent black again. He opened the door. No sound entered strong. Only cold mist and remnants of last night. The steps wore a thin crust of snow, cut by small footprints. Prints clear in heel and toe, evenly spaced, straight from door to porch edge. No pause, no turn. From the edge, the prints stretched thin in a straight line toward a strip of earth, where ground, only there, held no snow like the rest. That strip showed beneath white powder as a dark stretch, not black, but shining faintly. Thin snow on it, shaped like blades, all aligned. Elias stood at the porch edge, did not step down at once. He studied the track. No return marks, only going, not far. The track ended at the ridge. He stepped onto the first stair, the second, then stopped. Boots sank in snow with a low sound. He did not place his foot on the dark ground. He bent, tapped its edge with the hammer handle. The sound not dull like wet earth. Firm, springing, as if something lay beneath, not wishing its name spoken. He tapped again elsewhere. Same sound. One eye narrowed against the sharp, cold light from ice. At the edge, he saw specks caught in the frost, faintly yellow against white, unclear, not certain, but enough for the eye to hold. He touched with a fingertip, numb cold. The specks did not move. He drew back, wiped his hand on his trouser, stood straight. The wind did not push him away. Yet by his turn, I knew his back wished for the house. The small footprints had stepped once onto that ground, then ended. No knee prints, no hands, only a path to, once. No disturbance, like someone came to see, not to take. One who knew earth in a way that did not need touching. He turned back. On the table, beside the half-cleaned lamp, lay something not there last night. A sprig of dried mint. Thin stem, flat leaves curled into arcs. The scent did not rise sharp like fresh mint. It mixed with wool, with lamp oil, with ash. One had to bring it close to separate. Elias smelled it from an arm away. No knock. The latch still set. The cloth hung as before. The steps no new marks, yet on the table it was. I did not know which way she came. Perhaps she left it before he looked. Perhaps she had been always in sight, only he had not learned to see in the right slit. He did not touch it once. The mint on wood left a faint stain, dirty green. On the cup, water fully cold, but its rim still traced a breath mark on the lamp glass. 2 cents leaned by the wall, weighed the same, but felt heavier, for the hand was not empty. Elias closed around its handle, calluses fitting the old grooves. He went to the backyard. The chopping block stood rough, its base rimmed by snow crust like salt dried on a barrel. He brushed snow away with his hands back, set the first log down. The first strike went straight, opening the wood like opening a mouth. The sound rang into the porch, into the stove, struck the lamp glass, then bounced back. He turned the log. The second strike cut through the knot, split the halves clean. Dry pine gave off the scent of ripe resin. When that smell met the smell of dried mint in the house, it would make a third scent. Elias did not know yet. He kept splitting, each blow heavier than the last. Not because the wood was hard, because he wanted fatigue quick. Fatigue quick left no hand free for the head. He shifted his feet, changed angle, let the axe fall on a slant, costing less strength. Yet he struck heavy. Sweat came in the cold, not large drops, only a damp film at the collar edge, soaking wool. Breath rose and vanished at once, unseen to others. He stacked the wood, one end out, one end in, like a man raising a wall. Logs even in length, edges packed with small pieces, no gaps. I saw a man filling something else, not air. Each time he looked up, his eyes dragged back to the dark strip of ground. He did not step there. The axe brought his eyes back here. Like the habit of a rider pulling reins with one hand, whenever the horse looked aside, the hand pressed its neck. By midday, he stopped to sharpen the blade. The whetstone dry, the morning's water gone. Steel scraped flat, even, not harsh. He tilted the edge, found its old angle. One hand held, the other drew. Each draw carried the blade from thin to thick. The sound followed. He wiped the edge, checked sharpness, did not test in light. He pressed with a fingernail, felt. Enough. He kept splitting. On the porch, the small footprints still there, no more, no less. Thin, cold sun through cloud, the ice surface on the dark strip shining half a shade brighter. He worked as if not seeing, but anyone long here knew one thing. Not looking did not mean not seeing. Eyes were drawn back, so hands could still work. He shifted work, sawed larger logs, stacked the pile tighter against the wall, pulled cloth over the sawdust heap, fixed the alarm string around the yard where it had loosened in the storm. The cans rang faintly when he touched, a sound like coins falling in thick cloth. He stopped at the stable door, hand on latch a beat, then left, did not open, did not call an animal's nose against the cracks to ease the sting. He dried on his shirt hem, not cloth. He ate lunch with half a piece of dry bread, did not sit, leaned against the stove front, eyes still drawn sideways toward the window. Outside, the dark strip remained, like a cut in earth's skin. No blood, no mouth, only telling that beneath was something unlike the rest. He picked up anything for work, checked the boards at the bed's foot, lifted, set down, listened, still firm. By afternoon, back to the chopping block. The axe no longer heavy as in morning, not because hands were stronger, but because the head had tired. Blows struck true, with no waste, chips fewer. The stack reached his waist. He stopped, breathed long. The breath not complaint, like dust in lungs finding exit. He entered before night. The mint brittle now, a touch would break it. He did not touch. He lifted the lamp, set it closer to the table edge, then pushed it back. The glass faced the door. Through its blur, the dark strip of ground looked like a brush stroke spilled by accident. He sat at the chair, back straight, hands on thighs, eyes on the space between table and stove. There, thought of the dark strip, flared like a coal caught by draught. He set his axe down inside his head, adding one more weight. The coal dimmed. Outside, the sky shifted voice again. No rain, no people, only the calm that comes after a night of many sounds. Inside, the objects returned to place, axe at wall, saw laid flat, lamp still dried mint, blur on glass. A man still burying himself in work, refusing his eyes to land on what he knew had shown. In this land, often the first price is working the body until it forgets the hand that wanted to dig. Morning rose slow, like an old man rising. Inside, objects back to their spots. On the shelf, the axe stood straight, handle to wall, head black and polished, the smell of iron mixed with dry pine resin. Beside it the brass lamp, rubbed bright, soot on glass reduced to a thin ring at the rim, like smoke rim left by choice. I saw the cloth hanging at the window latch, stained two colors, brass yellow, wick black. Elias unscrewed the lamp's mouth with 2 fingers. The old knob, smooth in skin, squeaked like a chipped tooth. He pulled the wick bit by bit. Thick, black outside, inside still dirty cotton. Old oil scent rose faintly, not sharp, like a mailbox opened after winter. He did not tear it. He pulled slow until the lamp throat gaped, the inner tube bare, shining like a voiceless throat. The wick sat in his palm. He coiled it, a small loop like an old leather strap. He did not feed it to fire. He did not throw it in ash. He put it in hand, dying on the glass rim. He lifted the lamp, set it beside the axe. The space between the two measured the width of 3 fingers. No closer, no farther. 2 things apart, standing on one shelf, like 2 sentences unlinked, yet speaking of one night. The light from the window poured into the room pale like water mixed with ice. It brushed the axe head, rolled down the lamp's body, drew a thin line across the glass. With the wick gone, the lamp no longer held the familiar shadow of its black thread. Instead, there was a hollow depth, reflecting everything around in warped shapes, like water breathing. On the table beneath, the lamp's light made a strip of gold as thin as a dried leaf. Outside, snow melted on the porch to expose wet, dark wood, the steps like the mouth of a silent fish. Elias arranged the shelf. He turned the axe a quarter round, handle outward, head inward. He turned the lamp the other way, glass facing the window. He stepped back, half a pace, looked over it all, gave a nod no outsider would notice. This was how men of the forest said, "Enough." He pulled a chair, sat a while, did nothing. His hand rubbed the long scratch on the table. Dust from brass had dulled it, but it stayed in the wood. He set his palm on the last faint mark left on the lamp glass, did not wipe. Warm. Then he stood, shut the nail box again and again as though testing its seal. The box said nothing. The house swallowed silence. By noon, the sky lifted one notch of white, the rim of clouds like a blade long used, edge gone. Wind through the gorge swept across the porch, carrying the scent of earth newly bared under snow. Elias drew a 3-legged stool to the door. The wood gave one short cry, then settled. He sat, back straight, feet apart the right distance. In his hands the dry mint sprig she had left. Thin stem, shriveled leaves, veins like fishbone. He did not break it. His thumb traced from base to tip, slow. The callus at the thumb felt little, so he switched fingers. The wind carried a thread of scent so faint that without knowing mint, he would think it the smell of clean cloth. It touched his nose, then was gone. He waited again. The wind went, with a hint of forest too slight. Snow dripping from pine needles, a bird stamping in thorn, the alarm string brushing its nail. Enough for air to pass. From inside, trees by the stream nodded once. On the wall, the shadow of a hanging coat string twitched like a small fish waking. No one left at midday in this season, unless running. He did not run. The wind brought a warmth not yet named, mint's faint scent like another house's smoke. He turned the stem, nail touching the small knot at its joint, a part already bruised, bent, but not broken. He let that wound face the sky. The wind passed, the bruised part quivered alone, made no sound. He set the sprig on the rail, 2 lines from the edge, so wind would not sweep it. Then stood, nudged a strip of frozen water on the step with his boot tip to dry it faster. Old snow rolled, broke to dust. Afternoon sun came early, flat, gentle. His back took it in. Like cloth long hung suddenly catching flame. Inside, the lamp had left the shelf for the table quietly, perhaps before he stepped out, perhaps when he returned for water. I did not see the motion, only the result. Lamp back at its old spot, where the pale circle on wood still was, glass turned to the window, brass body throwing one thin mark onto the table. No wick. The wit tube hollow, showing through to the far side, bending the man's reflection at the door into a long, warped leaf. He entered, went straight to the lamp, laid his hand on its mouth to test if the blur had dried. The glass cool, skin warm. His print left mist, then faded, like breath on glass when he was a boy. The lamp at the table, below the eyes, two things at two heights, like two sentences read at two tempos. On the porch rail, the dry mint lay still, tip angled toward the dark land, but not pointing straight. No winter flies, no bees, only wind and light. He lit the stove again, not for cold, but to hear the wood crack as men hear a house's pulse. Wood caught slow, small cracks like old corn. He added one log, leaned it to give air. The flame did not reach the lamp, but the brass caught a few red sparks through the glass. They hung a moment, gathered into a thin line, then went out like an eye closing. He drew a chair, sat an arm's length from the table. Back straight, hands on thighs, thumbs resting, not tapping. His eyes did not search, they only stayed. On the hollow of the lamp's neck, where the wick once rose, where daylight now came through and night fire reflected back, where two sides met, but did not merge. I heard the wood beams ease. The room breathed once, then stilled. I seldom trust endings. In this land, blanket still folded. Door closed with wood bolt, iron bar not hooked. The dark patch outside sat beyond the frame. The thought of it, not gone, but no longer chasing. In the room, the table held the lamp's thin shadow. Not fire's light, but daylight sliding through washed glass, stopping where soot still faint, imprinting down like ink too watered. So thin that a touch would break it, yet left alone it stayed until dusk. I looked at it, remembered the night before, the man lowering his gun, the girl holding a lamp unlit. Between them, a space that bound by asking nothing. Before night fully came, Elias lifted the mint sprig from the rail, brought it in, set it beside the lamp. Did not touch glass, did not touch knob. Only let the dry stem brush the lamp's reflection on the table, the two dry things, scratching, a paper sound. He stood a while, long enough to hear his heart beat on thin air. Then he turned to the stove, poured hot water into a cup, did not drink at once, set it down on the pale circle marked by years. The cup pressed into memory like a seal into warm wax. Night entered the house like an old friend, without knocking. Fire lowered, only murmured. On the lamp's glass, the faint light mark remained, like a sign that it held one night of a person. No one lit it, no one wished it gone. It stayed between axe, mint, and a hand that knew to stop. In this land, some things need no light to be seen. They only need to remain still, to remind that once someone knocked, and a lamp was held as a flame without fire. Here, the story runs out of words. The cold keeps a thin mark on the lamp glass. No miracles, only a gun lowered, a lamp held unlit, a wick drawn out to silence. Some things need not burn to illumine. They stay, reminding a man to stop at the right time. Like the dry mint sprig, scent gone, but keeping the shape of warmth passed through. If where you are there is such an object, a lamp left behind, a faint circle on wood, a small thing that keeps fire without flame, add one line, so we know we still recognize one another in silence. We go on, slow, let wind keep the last trace of scent, and let the thin light on glass remind